Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought all in all that I would talk about this particular subject that I found very particularly interesting. And for those of you that have been around my channel long enough, you know that my main talking points are usually that about the sport of boxing or maybe about the sport of MMA because those are the two main sports that I am usually the most invested in. Of course, I'm also very interested in NFL football and NBA basketball, but my knowledge would probably have to improve overall on the playing styles of those sports a little bit more, even though I know a certain amount about them. I'm not necessarily completely new. But one of the sports overall that I certainly love to watch, other than that of NFL football or NBA basketball, outside that of boxing and MMA or any combat sport, is that of professional tennis. And professional tennis has been a sport, in my opinion, that I have found very particularly interesting as soon as I started watching it. And of course, if you grew up throughout the 2000s and the 2010s, especially throughout the 2010s, you know that there was basically a three-man race between that of Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and also Novak Djokovic. But anyways, I thought that I would talk about this because once again, Novak Djokovic has now tied the all-time Grand Slam record, at least when you talk about men's overall Grand Slam records in that of the modern or the open era. He now has the most amount of Grand Slams tied with Rafael Nadal. I believe overall of all time. It's going to be very interesting to see how these next couple of years occur to see overall who wins the most amount of Grand Slams. But anyways, in this video, I seen this one video that I thought was very particularly interesting to where once again we would talk about all three of those players between Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic, and in my opinion, who clearly is winning the race. And if you've seen my videos in the past, you know who I truly believe is leading the race. I think that there's a very objective answer to it, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. But I just thought that we would talk about it because there's certain things, in my opinion, to where the bar has been changed overall to prevent overall a certain player out of these three to debatably be the greatest of all time by the media and that by fans, which makes me wonder what overall is the vendetta that they end up having with this athlete. But overall, let's talk about it. Let's tune in. I believe that this channel is called Primal Tennis. And overall, he's going to try and make points overall with all three of the players of why they could and could not be the GOAT overall compared to the rest of them. But let's see overall what he has to say.
This one, we're going to be solving the GOAT debate between Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, and Novak Djokovic. The margins are so slim, how can you possibly pick one? You know what I mean? I want you guys to go ahead and comment.
Well, in my opinion, actually, the margins aren't really that particularly slim. And some people overall may disagree, but listen, I've already told people this in the past. The man overall who is clearly leading the race, in my view, it's very clearly Novak Djokovic. I don't think that there's really a debate about that, unless he is not leading at Grand Slams at the current moment. There's just really no argument that you really have for Roger Federer. I could maybe understand an argument for Rafael Nadal, but even with Rafael Nadal, there's very little arguments for Rafael Nadal. Now, the main point that a lot of people would mention about Rafael Nadal over Novak Djokovic is that Rafael Nadal, that he leads the advantage in terms of wins and majors, which is pretty much overall, like, I guess if you were to compare it in a way, overall, like if we were to compare Tim Duncan and LeBron, who in my opinion are two players actually that are along the same lines in terms of greatness. I think that they're about within the same league, and some people overall would disagree because Tim Duncan would probably have more wins against LeBron James in the playoffs and vice versa. But that's a very great debate in my opinion. But here's the problem. Even though Rafael Nadal does lead against Novak Djokovic, I don't really know what the advantage is in terms of majors. What a lot of Rafael Nadal fans don't mention in terms of the context is that the reason why this is because pretty much 90% of the time that they have played in a major, in terms of the bracket or in terms of a final, it pretty much was on Nadal's 100% favorite court. It was on clay. Rafael Nadal, overall, he's very rarely fought or faced Novak Djokovic in that of the Wimbledon. He's only faced him 3 times. And when Novak Djokovic overall faced Rafael Nadal, when both of them were at their best, Novak Djokovic was able to beat him both times. Rafael Nadal also has never been able to beat him at the Australian Open. And the U.S. Open, it's somewhat pretty even, but Rafael Nadal has a slight edge there. So that's what a lot of people won't really mention with the context. Because really, if Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic met up at the Australian Open, Novak Djokovic would probably have as many wins overall as over Rafael Nadal as what Nadal would have over him in terms of the majors. But the reason why overall it's not more even is because Novak Djokovic is so complete on clay compared to most other players. He pretty much is the second best clay player of his generation, while Rafael Nadal is the first. But the problem with Rafael Nadal is that a lot of the times in the Australian Open and in the Wimbledon, he can't even make the semifinals or that of the final. So really, he doesn't even get to face that of Novak Djokovic because he usually can't even make it that far. But anyway.
In the comment section, let me know what you think. Who's the GOAT? Whether you agree with me or disagree, please hit that like and subscribe button. I appreciate it. I think the GOAT conversation is starting to become irrelevant. And I used to say it was all about the
People always say that shit. They always say that the GOAT conversation is starting to become irrelevant. They always say that shit when the person that is leading in the GOAT conversation, when they don't like that person or when their favorite athlete, they know more than likely that they don't have as much of a shot. More than likely, this guy is a Roger Federer fan, if I were to guess. And you're seeing a lot of Roger Federer fans or Rafael Nadal fans all of a sudden out of nowhere. Now that Novak Djokovic has been able to tie the Grand Slam record, they're like, oh, well, the GOAT debate is really irrelevant. Or, well, how do we really know if Novak Djokovic is the GOAT, because Pete Sampras and all sort of shit. And some of these arguments are a little bit valid. And we're going to talk about the Pete Sampras, argument a little bit later on. And the argument for that basically is that Pete Sampras and some of the older players, they didn't play as long as some of the current players, which is absolutely true. But once again, these Roger Federer fans and Rafael Nadal fans, they had no problem overall putting Nadal and Federer over Pete Sampras for 20 years. But then all of a sudden, Novak Djokovic ties it up and they're like, well, wait a minute, let's look at Pete Sampras. Well, are you looking at Pete Sampras because you're actually trying to put context behind it? Or are you looking at Pete Sampras because you don't want Novak Djokovic to be remembered as the greatest of all time? Like, come on. What's the real motivation here?
most majors. How many majors you have. It's still going to be fun to watch, but now Federer is out of the running. He's going to finish in third. I'm going to go ahead and make cases why Federer is the GOAT, why Nadal could be the GOAT, why Djokovic is the GOAT. And I'll give you cases why they're not.
Well, listen, what I'll say is this. It's really, I'm not going to say it's really difficult, but in tennis, you could maybe debate that there is, a greater player other than these three. There's a debate overall for that of Rod Laver, I believe, the Australian player. Some, of course, would debate Ken Rosewall or some other people. Now, I would have to do a little bit more research with that. But at the end of the day, generations are different. You can't necessarily 100% compare them 100% evenly or take a look at them side by side, because a lot of the times, some of the older tennis players, they may have not played in all Grand Slams or they didn't last as long. For those of you that take a look at basketball, there's a lot of people that would debate that Larry Bird is still over LeBron James, and I really don't have a problem with that argument. Because now some people would say, well, why would you say that? Because LeBron James overall, he has more finals MVPs, he has more MVPs, and he has more championships. And you could say that, but the thing is that LeBron James, he pretty much has the same accomplishments as that of a Larry Bird overall within about 20-some seasons, while Larry Bird only got to play for about 13. So if you're bringing up people like Pete Sampras or, Ken Rosewall or Rod Laver, that's understandable. But once again, the problem that I have overall with certain arguments like that is that the media and a lot of these other guys, they didn't have a main problem with not bringing those guys up anymore, as long as Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal were in first place. But as soon as Novak Djokovic looks to be in first place, for whatever reason, I don't know what the main problem is with this guy that the media and the fans have. I can think of a multitude of reasons, but I'll talk about that later. All of a sudden, the bar changes. And that's how you can tell that there's a personal vendetta against that athlete, when the bar always changes. That's how you can tell when someone's a hater, because you can never truly overall make them happy no matter what results they get. It's always like, oh, well, they fought a weak era, or, oh, they did this, or, overall, oh, that wasn't a real, true competitor. Like, overall, I remember when Skip Bayless, and I don't completely mind Skip Bayless all the time, but it's very clear that he has a little bit of an issue with that of Steph Curry. And I know why, because he doesn't like LeBron James, and he's still pissed off to this very day that Steph Curry choked that 3-1 lead in the 2016 finals. Well, last year against the Boston Celtics, he said that if Steph Curry is going to be a top 10 player, that he would have to beat the Boston Celtics. Well, he did exactly that, and he got his first finals MVP. And now Skip Bayless is saying, oh, well, the Boston Celtics, they weren't really a real NBA Finals team, even though they had Jason Tatum and Marcus Smart and overall, Jaylen Brown and a multitude of other decently great players, Al Horford. And on top of that, they had the number one defense in the league. Now, if you want to say that they didn't have a player opposing Steph Curry like a LeBron or a KD or a Kawhi or a Giannis or something like that, you can maybe say that. But Jason Tatum still was first team All NBA. So anyway,
Ultimately, going to end up in a thing where there is no undisputed GOAT. With Federer's recent retirement, it's become obvious that he's going to finish last place in the Grand Slam count. He's got 20. Djokovic has already got 21 and counting. Nadal's got 22 and counting. So he's not going to win that. But I think there's arguments to be made why Federer could be the GOAT. He is probably the best tennis player I have ever seen walk on a court on a given day. His peak and his prime.
Well, in my opinion, Novak Djokovic is probably the best all-around tennis player that I've seen. Now, if you were to say Roger Federer, I wouldn't really have a problem with it. But the thing overall with Roger Federer that gets me is that, first of all, he doesn't have a leading record, head-to-head record over either of them. And then on top of that, I mean, people always like to say that this guy is potentially more skilled than the other guy. But if that really were true, then Novak Djokovic wouldn't have such an advantage over him, especially in terms of Grand Slams. Now, some people may say, well, wait a minute, because you said overall, with the context with Rafael Nadal earlier, so why overall you're not given the same standards? Because here's the thing. Rafael Nadal is very clearly the best clay court player of that generation. So even Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer, they're going to have an extraordinarily tough time beating that of Rafael Nadal on clay. But when Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic have met on hard court, and even at a grass court or clay court, I believe Novak Djokovic has the advantage in every single category. So for Roger Federer allegedly being more skilled than Novak Djokovic, I'm just not sure if I can agree with that.
I don't think that I've ever witnessed better tennis than Roger Federer. And the way he's handled himself with grace, he's a complete shot maker. And I mean all the shot. Finesse, power, monster forehand, huge serve, accurate. The adjustments he made later on in his career were mind-blowing because we had never seen anybody do that before. He started playing more offensively, holding the baseline, serving with immaculate accuracy. Before Federer, we thought that the age limit expiration date on a tennis player was about 31, 32 because we had seen Sampras fall off the mat there, Agassi, all the players. And Federer transformed the game by making those late career adjustments that allowed him to stack up a whole new set of majors. I think paved the path for Nadal and Djokovic to be playing top-level tennis into their mid to late 30s. Why Federer may not be the GOAT is he's going to finish last in the major count. We already know that. And this one actually hurts quite a bit to say, but he's got a losing record to both Nadal and Djokovic. His record against Nadal.
So pretty much as I predicted, this man is a Roger Federer fan. I could pretty much see it from a mile away. And once again, overall, that's why you're not supposed to be a fan or a major fanboy of these guys, because it ruins your logic and objectivity. Listen, Roger Federer, overall, he does have certain records. I believe that he has more overall titles than that of Rafael Nadal and Djokovic. If I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. And of course, he has more career games won. But really, besides that, I mean, he may have a gold medal as well. I don't know. Maybe a silver medal. I don't know. But really, other than that, he really doesn't beat Djokovic in anything. Now, if you're comparing Roger Federer to Rafael Nadal, that might be a little bit more debatable. But because Rafael Nadal now has 2 more Grand Slams against Roger Federer, and on top of that, he also has the leading record, I'm not so sure. And actually, to be quite honest with you, Rafael Nadal does not even have the leading record over Roger Federer in even just a Roland Garros. He even has the leading record over him, I believe, in that of the Australian Open. Now, to be fair, Rafael Nadal has not won as many titles overall as what Roger Federer has in the Australian Open. I believe that Roger Federer has 5, Rafael Nadal only has 2. And really, in my opinion, really should only be 1 because of that bullshit last year overall that Australia did by banning Djokovic, but it is what it is. But anyways, when it comes down to it all in all, Rafael Nadal, you could certainly debate, is greater than Roger Federer. More Grand Slams with the head-to-head record also, he has that advantage. But of course, if you were to debate Roger, it could make sense because overall, one could debate maybe he's a slightly all-around more complete player, but that's debatable. In my opinion, that's debatable. And on top of that, overall, he has more days at the number 1 spot. So it really depends on what you look at. But in my view, if I were to take a look at it, I probably would put Rafael Nadal just slightly ahead of Federer.
All is 16-24, and his record against Djokovic is 23-27. Now that 16-24 Nadal that's significant, but we can put an asterisk on any of these because a lot of those matches were on clay, but Nadal's undoubtedly the best player in clay of all time. Okay, so we got Rafael Nadal next. I've never witnessed someone try so hard on every single point, consider every single point, just running for balls, putting in maximum effort. He stopped doing that a little bit in the last few years, and I think it's tactical on obvious points he can't win. I love Nadal's philosophy. He's a chronic doubter, which he says uses that to his advantage. He treats every opponent very, very seriously, every match very, very seriously, every point very, very seriously. A stoic. Maybe not a stoic. Finding happiness in just the process and enjoying tennis for the love of the game, as opposed to putting my happiness in whether I win or lose. Just loves being out there. He's won at least 2 majors on every surface, which is a huge accomplishment. Because if
Yeah, and really it should, and really it shouldn't be that way once again, because we all know that the Australian Open that they did Djokovic dirty with that bullshit last year, but it is what it is. If you still want to give Rafael Nadal credit for that, I ain't got a problem with it because at least he did beat Daniel Medvedev. But in my opinion, this is just my view. Rafael Nadal really only has 21 majors.
remember, Federer only got that one French Open. There is no argument at all whether Nadal is the best on clay. He is.
And some people might ask me, well, Djokovic overall, he has won certain titles when Rafael Nadal was not there, right? But that was voluntary. There's a difference overall when a player voluntarily decides not to play or has to back up because of injury, because that's a little bit more natural. Had Djokovic been injured and had he had to pull out, then I would have said, okay, you know what, that's not, it's not really Nadal's fault either. Overall, that the Australian Open banned him. But it was very clear, in my opinion, that they were trying to get Nadal to win to win overall that Grand Slam, no doubt about it. Anyway,
Best.
Because Djokovic overall, once again, he is the greatest player at the Australian Open probably in history that I've ever seen, and they ban him overall. Like, no, I'm sorry, I don't count that Grand Slam.
Clay court player of all time. You could say he's maybe the second or third best all time on hard court, the third or fourth best all time of grass. So it wasn't like he's a chump on grass. He was always in those semifinals, quarterfinals of Wimbledon. Injuries have hurt him. He's had just a ton of injuries. I think he'd probably have 30 majors, and we wouldn't even be having this argument if it wasn't for his injury history. It just seems like something always.
Oh, please. Once again, Djokovic has had a multitude of injuries. There's been a multitude of other tennis players that have had injuries. Next.
Gets him. So reason why is Nadal is not the GOAT. He's probably going to finish behind Djokovic in the major count. He's never won the ATP finals at the end of the year. He's third place in the big three of having the number one ranking. Federer held the number one ranking for forever. Djokovic has had it a whole bunch of times. Because of Nadal's injury history, he just hasn't been in number one in the world as long as they have. He's got that winning record of Federer, basically equal with Djokovic at 30 losses to 29 wins against Djokovic. Guys, please comment in the comment section. Let me know how much you disagree with me. Novak Djokovic. He's an all-surface animal. He's the best of the game right now. Has been for the last 10 years. I expect him to have about... people think I'm crazy. I think he's going to have about 28 majors by the time he retires. So he's going to, by far, have the most majors when it's all said and done. Most people count that as the sole, all-be-all GOAT, and I'm explaining to you why I don't think that should be the case. One of the things Djokovic should have done is he should have embraced the bad boy persona, because he is a bad boy. The only problem is that he wanted to be loved by the same way that Federer and Rafa fans adore those guys. But he was like a little late to the party. He's
right, but what the hell does that have to do with the GOAT conversation? Once again, all these stupid asses, they all make these same stupid ass points about, oh, well, Djokovic, he'll never be embraced in his love. What does that have to do overall with the greatest of all time conversation? Like, why would you start up with that?
Always a guy that's had a lot of antics. People just didn't really like that. Was displayed in the wrong way with lacking authenticity. Djokovic has always been that play a little hurt on the court, acting like he's hurt, I'm a victim, and then that's when he's the most dangerous, alright, because he's not really hurt. He just has remarkable comebacks out of it. He had the thing where he hit the lady at the US Open, he hit the line judge with a ball in the neck, was disqualified. Come on, dude. And then, so he got in trouble for...
Right, once again, what the hell does this have to do with the GOAT conversation? You see how fucking stupid some of these Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal fans are? Anyway.
That, and then a few months later, he throws his racket into the stands at the Olympics. This guy's never going to learn breaking rackets. My biggest problem with Djokovic is obviously, like I said, the antics. He's boring to watch. If I had to sit down and watch a 5...
Well, he's boring to watch for you. That's what Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal fans, they always say. And that's what certain people always say whenever they don't like a particular athlete. They're like, oh, he's boring to watch. Well, the reason why he's boring to watch for you is because overall you don't like him and you don't want to see him succeed. I don't see overall how Novak Djokovic, how he can allegedly be this boring to watch when he's probably the most all-around skilled player out of all three of them. His forehand is comparable with any of them. His backhand is probably the best out of all of them. His returning is undoubtedly the best out of all of them. He's debatably the best defensive player out of all of them. He can move around the court overall almost like nobody else I've ever seen besides that, maybe of a Rafael Nadal. And on top of that, he gives you great, intelligent, overall, and entertaining matchups. So people always love to say this shit about how Novak Djokovic is so boring. Bullshit. The only reason overall why people say that is because they didn't want Novak to be in the lead. Like, come on.
Or Djokovic match. It's like just watching a backboard. I mean, he gets everything back, and he's very good. There's no doubt about that. He lacks that fun power tennis that Federer and Nadal have. And don't get me wrong, he hits his winners. Running things down, hitting it.
He lacks that power, apparently, that both Federer and Nadal had. Bullshit, because if you lack that amount of power overall, then he wouldn't have been able to beat those guys. Novak is overall one of the very few that actually, at times, at least when he's at his best, that can actually somewhat compete with Rafael Nadal's forehand. One of the very few.
Playing an angle. He just should have played that bad boy mentality like the same way that Kyrgios has. So Kyrgios is a bad boy, but he doesn't shy away from that. That's who he is.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how apparently all these guys, they apparently don't like Djokovic because he's allegedly arrogant and he's overall, he's a guy that thinks he's so above everyone else and he's this baby. But then against Nick Kyrgios, who were they cheering for? They were cheering for Nick Kyrgios. Probably one of the most mentally unstable tennis players overall within the history of the game. Anyway.
But Djokovic still...
But of course that happens quite often, but that's how you know once again when a hater goes on, because once again they're always going to cheer for, who is the lesser of the threat.
Wanted to be loved by the fans. People just don't like that. I'm going to bring out one more thing that most of you guys probably haven't thought about. What about Pete Sampras? He got 14 majors. But the thing is, he retired at 31. Officially at 32, but he won his last tournament at 31. The US Open. If Sampras had played another 6 or 7 years, he would have had 20 majors too. There isn't any doubt of that in my mind. And his biggest knock is that he never won the French Open, but the game of tennis was different back then. He's a grass court specialist, really good on hard courts. He won 7 hard court championships. He's a serve and volleyer, and that's just not going to work on clay because the clay is so slow. Doesn't matter how big your serve is, it's going to slow down some and let guys kind of pick you apart, counter punching, serve and volley. Sampras would have 20, and I just think that's crazy. That good for Federer for trailblazing that you can still play good tennis competitively in your mid-30s and late 30s. My main point is that these guys all needed each other. If there hadn't been a Djokovic, Federer and Nadal would have each won like 30 majors or more. And if there was only one...
Yes, that more than likely is true. Once again, because Novak Djokovic, once he hit his peak and his stride in 2011, he very quickly took over. Once again, I've never seen a tennis player, at least during my time, that in terms of the peak level, that I've seen on the same level as Djokovic. And once again, the man didn't really bring up any good points for Djokovic debatably being the greatest of all time, so I guess I'll bring him up. Once again, Djokovic has the most amount of days at the number 1 spot. He has the most amount of ATP Finals wins, I believe was 6. When it comes down to it, he has the most amount of Grand Slams, tied with Rafael Nadal for the most amount of Grand Slams, and that of the Open era. He is debatably the most skilled out of all of them, and certainly the most complete player. He is the best all-around Australian Open player of his generation. He's also, in my view, clearly the best Wimbledon player of his generation, or the grass player of his generation. And clay, he's probably in second place, right behind Nadal. So those are my points overall. I think it's very clear and cut and simple. I think it's very clear that Novak Djokovic leads this race. That's just my view. I think overall that it's very clear, very objective, but it is what it is.
One guy would have had 45 majors. We've been so blessed the last 20 years to have three all-time greats in the same era. It's become something that's irrelevant. We've got three GOAT. We witnessed the GOAT era. We're going to be seeing...
No, it's not something that became irrelevant. It became irrelevant once you realized that your boy Roger Federer, that he wasn't going to have the most amount of Grand Slams anymore. That's when all of a sudden, the GOAT conversation becomes irrelevant. The fuck out of here with that bullshit. But anyway, overall, once again, I just thought that that'd be very interesting because this conversation has been going on for a while. And a big part of the main reason why I also wanted to talk about it is because for whatever reason with Novak Djokovic, I'm not really sure why. It could maybe be just because he was the new up-and-comer and people didn't want him to surpass their GOATs or their favorite players. It could be that. It could maybe a little bit sometimes of his antics. It could be a little bit of a mix of everything. But Novak Djokovic, in my opinion, is not an eccentric or bad enough person overall to be hated that bad just for his personality. So obviously there's more into it. It just is what it is. But once again, I thought that I would talk about that. And the Pete Sampras argument, in my opinion, actually is not the worst. But I just find it interesting that people now bring up Pete Sampras now that Djokovic, more than likely once again, is clearly leading the race again. I find that very interesting. But anyways, that's really about it for today. I just thought that that'd be interesting to talk about. Novak Djokovic, in my opinion, is still very clearly winning the race. And let's see overall what ends up happening this year. Because Novak Djokovic, he should be able to win the next two Grand Slams if he is at his best. But we'll see what happens. But that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll talk to you all later.